All right, so real quick before this episode starts, I just kind of want to set the expectation. So this one's a little bit different. I'm not interviewing one person and talking about their life story and how they got to where they're at. This one's actually going to be kind of a special episode. I went ahead and reached out to a couple people and we wanted to talk about spirituality from a man's perspective. One thing we've noticed in this work is that there's not a lot of us. There are men out there practicing. There are men out there trying to better themselves in different ways. But when it comes to spirituality, it's something that we're kind of shut off from. So that's something we wanted to have a roundtable discussion about. So I hope you enjoy this. My hope is that this will be a continuous thing. We'll do this like once a month, kind of throw it out there. I'm not sure what to call it yet. Um, Again, just trying different things, putting out different information. But I think it's important for men in general to also have a place where we can talk about feelings and things like that that we're constantly shutting down and blocking off. And it's something from a different perspective that we need to look at. Obviously, there are some roles, but everyone has the masculine, everyone has the feminine within inside themselves, and it's finding that balance. And lately, the world's been out of balance. And so we want to bring balance in. And later in the episode, Jim talks about it, but men have to release some control and bring ourselves down a little bit as we also allow women to move up and then find this co-balance, this partnership within the world for both of us. And so that's really what this episode is about. I hope you enjoy it. And if you want to hear more content like this, please put it down in the comments or shoot me an email. Just let me know because I want to make sure this is interesting for everybody. I found it interesting, but hopefully you guys do too. All right. Thank you. All right, so thank you guys for coming today. For everyone that's listening or watching, this is kind of going to be there's no real good format for this yet. It's something we're just trying out today just to see how it goes. But basically, the overall arching discussion of this is men and spirituality in general. So one thing when I was talking with Mark, we realized that a lot of the classes we were going into, it would be about what, like 90% women, 10% men. Not a lot of men are taking this journey working towards spirituality. And I don't necessarily mean spirituality as in religion, but just spirituality as a whole. And I don't want to discount religion, but that's not really where we're coming from that I know of. And so that's kind of the basis of this format. We're just kind of do a round robin discussion, talk about things. But first, I want to, get everybody introduced. So first, I'll go first. My name is Jeremy Chimvert. I'm shamanic practitioner, podcasting with people around the world, talking about their own journeys, and that's what kind of led to this discussion. Mark, why don't you go ahead since I'm looking at you first?
Sure. Mark Mangus. Online, I go by the digital shaman, also shamanic practitioner. Like Jeremy, trained in the lineage of the Caro people of the Andes, and really interested to be part of this discussion.
Jim?
Yeah, Jim Greywolf Petruzzi, shamanic practitioner for years. Been working with shamanic medicine for years. I learned most of my medicine in the jungles and in the mountains as I traveled around. So I've my primary teachers were Lakota, but I've also worked with Mayan teachers and Garifuna teachers from Africa and a host of others. So I'm a true Mongol.
So with that, I guess my first question is just going to be, I don't want to get down into the whole path and the whole history of everything, but what led you into spirituality? This form of spirituality. Was there something specific that kind of guided you towards it? Was it like a calling you've always kind of have? And again, I don't want to go into 30 minutes of backstory, but just kind of a brief overview of what got you to where you're at. I know, Jim, you wanna go first? Sounds like you had more.
Sure. Okay. And that's a very good idea because the rule is you never ask an elder, and my group tells me I'm an elder. Never ask him to speak unless you give him a timeline, because we could be here 2 days from now. Yeah, I'm glad you differentiated religion and spirituality. They're very different, very different. And I'm not saying either one's right or wrong, but I left religion early on. My grandmother, on the day she died, that's another story, told me that she was gonna hand down she was a medicine woman, in Europe, Italy and Switzerland, and it was gonna be handed down to me because it skipped a generation. And I thought I was about 21 years old and thought grandmom had completely jumped the tracks. But I had already quit religions, but it was a number of years, and then I came west, and, I was looking for something else, couldn't find it, and then I stopped looking, and then, of course, it found me. So, spirituality, shamanism all found me.
What about you, Mark?
For me, it was my own path of healing, first physically, then emotionally, and then spiritually. I, without going into the backstory, I had 5 near-death experiences. The most recent one was 2015.
Mm.
And at that point, I realized that I was going to have to completely and radically shift my lifestyle if I wanted to survive. And I had been reading about indigenous wisdom and world history and the commonalities between cultures and religious history for 35 years. But it was just intellectual knowledge. It was just stories. But something definitely shifted when I started practicing some of these indigenous ceremonies and permanently changed me, shifted my energy, and put me on a completely different path and basically exploded my reality and made me see the world completely differently. And yeah, so that's kind of what led me to it. Now, why Andean shamanism? I think that was just spirit putting that in my way and saying, do this. I had no prior affinity to it. It was just available and in front of me. And so that's what I went with. But like Jim, I mean, I'm much later in my, later in life, I started my path, but I'm interested in all indigenous wisdom. I don't feel proprietary about what I learned at all. I think there's universal truth everywhere, even in religion.
Mhm.
And it's our job to find it as humans. Where is the truth? It's like, where's Waldo, right? There's truth everywhere. And part of our makeup is to be curious and to find it. But once we figure out that we have the answer, that's when we have to be very suspicious because there's always more.
Yeah, I agree with that. I say one story I tell a lot was I was in Egypt, 1999 to 2000 for the millennial for New Year's Eve. And I was actually hanging out with some locals. That's a whole nother story. But at one point during the night, one of the guys was saying, there's Buddhism, there's Judaism, there's Christianity, there's Muslim, there's all these other religions, but they all get you to one God. And that just kind of resonated with me. It's like, it doesn't matter which way you believe or how you believe. It just matters that you get there. Now, I like to change the word God to spirit because I feel that's higher person,
Mhm.
but that always resonated. I was 19 years old, smoking weed with a bunch of Egyptians, like eating bread on, cross-legged on their floor, and it just always stuck with me. I'm like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." With my own story, though, I didn't grow up religious. I tried a bunch of different churches with friends who were religious. I spend the night on Saturday. I'd go with them on church on Sunday, see what it's about. Just never resonated with me. I read the Egyptian Book of the Dead and all other sorts of like tomes and Bibles and stuff just to see what it's all about. And had a lot of appreciation for the stories that were in there, the lessons, but the overall rules of it, I guess, just never really
Mhm.
resonated because it just felt hypocritical to me. It was like, "You must do this, but it's okay if you do this as long as you say you're sorry the next day." That never made sense to me. And so I never really clicked with anything because of that. And it wasn't until after I got out of the military, like right before I got out of the military, we had my first son, and that just started that shift. I started doing chickens, reading about this, reading about that, and then trying to work on my own PTSD and my own healing. And it was because of that that led me into horse shamanism first. And I kept feeling there was something missing with that, something more that I needed. And then same thing, just the Andean shamanism just kept coming up, just kept coming up. It was like, go. And looking back, even 2011, I was in Germany in college on a base, and 9/11 happened. We were literally on the floor with a world map going, okay, if the trade winds are coming here and nuclear war is coming, we should go to Peru. Let's go to Peru. Yeah, almost went to Peru, but never quite made it. But yeah, it was just one, there was no real rhyme or reason to it, I guess. It just led me there. And I'm still working my way through it, of course.
Yeah.
Because you're, like you said, Jim, you're never done. There's always something new. And so with that, I guess the real conversation I want to have is, mm, I mean, I have my own thoughts and ideas, but that's why we're all here. It's
Mhm.
why do we think it's so hard for men in general to
Ah,
find spirituality? And I'll let the elder go.
okay, yeah, I'll take that. That's good because I put that aside as you said it. I've been walking this longer than either one of you, I'm sure. So I've earned these gray hair. They didn't just appear.
Oh,
It's really interesting. Yeah, you too. When I started, ooh, 40 years ago now, about 40 years ago, maybe a little more than that. What you just said was the rule. Almost no men, even fewer white men.
Mhm.
I didn't know I had native blood at that point. I didn't know until about 10 years ago when I did a test. Um, and it was almost always me, maybe one or two other guys, and 20 women. Um, and that was off-putting to a certain extent. I'm like, wow, how are we ever going to come together in harmony and equality and balance if it's, 8 to 1? Well, that started to shift and change dramatically. And even 5 or 6 years ago, it was much more in balance. It was much more, maybe it was 60-40 percentages, but a lot more men had showed up. Now, suddenly, the men are disappearing again. I think I have a couple of suspicions why. But just an example, a couple nights ago, we had a sweat lodge here. We do ceremonies at my place here. And as usual, some of the people who were supposed to come couldn't. Others would call up and say, Jim, is there still room? Um, and I never worry about that because Creator decides who's supposed to be here, and it's always right. But anyway, when the time came to begin, sitting around the fire was 11 women and me. And I'm like, whoa, this is interesting. And the other person who was going to pour with me, a Lakota brother, got sick, was in the hospital. Somebody who was going to carry the rocks got sick, couldn't come. Somebody else, a death in the family, couldn't come. So we ended up with all women and me. When something that obvious happens, I sit there and going, okay, creator, what am I supposed to understand? And we had one woman who stepped up, a Hawaiian native woman, and she said, I've always wanted to tend the fire. I'll do that. I said, okay, great. And another woman who was there who I really hold in high respect, and I'm teaching her some of the ways that she's requested. She said, "I can't go in. It's my time of the month, and I'm just not feeling comfortable. I'll sit the fire, and I've handled the fire in the rocks, so I'll work with her. I said, okay, awesome." And another was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to enlarge tonight. I'll be up in the kitchen. I'll be making the food for afterwards." The whole thing just started to fall into place. And so we went into the lodge, and I'm like, "What am I supposed to do now?" And before we went in, we loaded my sacred pipe at the fire, and the woman who I'm training, working with, just beginning, she and I opened it together because I wanted everyone there, and a couple of the women were not going in because of their time of the month. And it just started off really powerfully. We got into the lodge, and I'm thinking, am I going to feel uncomfortable? Am I not supposed to be here? Maybe it's just them. And that wasn't the case at all. It was completely not only comfortable, but I'm going, wow, this is what it was supposed to be. Another woman who's new in the area here took over, welcoming in the rocks and laying the sage and incense on the rocks. So as we went through the lodge, it got more and more powerful. We sensed a lot of ancestors. We spoke a bit about, okay, the men aren't here. And I actually mentioned our group. I said, I'm part of one men's group, and we're going to talk more about this. I really think there's some things at work here that were in the past. One is fear. You know, we go to any bottom of any emotion. That's a dark emotion. We find fear. A lot of men that I talk to and that I work with are very fearful of the women stepping up.
Mhm.
Yeah, either they're going to take over or they're going to get even more angry, on and on and on. Now, the women have their own issues on their side too, but they're much more adaptable to what's going on. They're much more connected to the mother, to the earth. My reminder there was two of the women were on their time of the month, and so they sat at the fire. They were directly connected with the earth.
Mhm.
So I think that fear is blocking a lot of men or pushing them away again. When what we need to do, in my opinion, is find a way to pull us all together. It
Right.
doesn't have to be perfect. It won't be. It never has been. But as I watched the women and I realized I was there, I poured because I was the one who knew how to do that. But other than that, I was there to observe, to record, to witness what was going on because it was the women that had to birth this new way. And I ended up seeing it as actually, I did a video today. I ended up seeing it as a new sort of lodge, a community based lodge for the people, by the people. And that's what I'm going to put out there. I'll still pour a traditional lodge when requested, but I'll be very clear which type we're doing. And
Mhm.
this, I hope, will get more of the men involved because we don't have to be threatened as men. We really don't. We have to drop the old stereotypes of males as well. We're not
Yeah.
we don't have to be the strength and the providers and bullshit on, you know,
Mhm.
which is what almost killed me, like you, Mark. A couple of times I almost went down. And it was because of that. I was trying to stand and be that impossible thing that they require of men. Sorry I talked long, but I think this is a big issue.
No, I think that's all good information. And just out of curiosity, the question I had was with a traditional lodge, how does that normally work? Is that
Mm.
normally just all men running it, every aspect of it, or
Yeah, you're asking really good questions. So, and this is something I brought up with other elders, other people who, because, we don't all agree, of course. Uh, I was taught that I would bring some changes into these things, just like my teachers did, who were full native. Traditionally, originally, the lodges were men only.
okay,
The women sometimes had their own lodge, which they'd use at their time of month. Uh, the woman who I'm helping train, she does those. She does red lodges for the women over at her property. So it was only men. Um, it was only men who drummed. Women didn't drum. There's a lot of other examples. I can't think of them now. That's changed. We all do co-ed lodges now. Some of the most traditional Native people I know do co-ed lodges. Sit there as the women drum. Well, something changed. So what difference of what changed then should continue to change? Life has changed. And that doesn't mean we don't honor the old ways. I do, totally and completely. And I'll pour those lodges if requested. But I think we have to mold and shift as we go through this because the whole planet's changing. If we don't, then we just become dinosaurs, and I don't really have a desire to be that.
Mm. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Jim's saying. That's been my experience too. I think if you put it in a historical perspective, I mean, pick an ancient philosophy. We're at the end of this cycle. The ancient Vedics called it the Yuga cycle, 25,000 year cycle, right? So we're in this time of creation and destruction overlapping, and all of the old paradigms are under stress, and many of them won't survive. And a lot of them were based on this very toxic notion of the masculine energy. And those are the things that are not sustainable. And we're coming into, from an astrological perspective, we're coming into more fully into the age of Aquarius, which is very divine feminine oriented. But I want to stress to the people that might be watching this, there's a balance to be had between the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and there are the toxic shadow parts of both. So I think there's a natural balancing that's happening, is why women are showing up in these spiritual circles, because it's almost like they're riding the wave of this divine feminine emergence. And unless as a man, you're open to that, you're not necessarily going to feel the call like the women will. It has to be much more of an intentional thing, or, your superhero origin story, like some of us, that where you had to die to figure it out and get changed and transformed and open to that kind of stuff, right? Sometimes men are pretty thick-headed that way. I know I was. It took me 5 times in my life to almost die, to start to listen. And I believe that's what spirit does. Is first it's a tickle, then it's a slap, then it's a punch in the face. And then you get pushed in front of a moving vehicle. And if that doesn't work, that might be your last chance.
Oh yeah, I agree with all of that actually. And it's kind of interesting to see it's almost parallel. So it's, Jim, the way you're talking about it's these traditions were mainly ran by men. And then on the Western culture side, the white man side of things, it's like a lot of the spirituality, drum circles and everything like that was only ran by women. So it's almost like the opposite from the way I look at it. And I think that's part of it too, is even today when I'm looking online, I'm like, oh, this class might be interesting. And it's like, oh, I teach women how to do this. And it's like, there's no talk about bringing a man into the circle. There's no talk about having a man there. And then now I'm getting, taught for the past 15, 20 years, all men are toxic and we're evil and we have to stay away from women. And it's like, but I'm not. Like, I haven't done anything to any of these women. Like, I'm just curious. I want to see what these things are about. And it's not a bad thing that they have a safe space, but the advertisement, I want to say, kind of excludes men too, where they think this isn't something they're supposed to do.
Well, I think if I can jump in here, I think the youngest generations are kind of showing us
Yeah.
a different way to be. It's no accident that, Gen Z, and I guess Gen A now they're calling it, are more gender aware, more gender fluid, more balanced between the masculine and the feminine. That's no accident. It's not. I don't believe it's culture. I don't believe it's our culture. I believe it's the energy of the age that's causing that awakening. Because I believe we've all been or are men and women,
Mhm.
whether you believe in reincarnation or multidimensional existence, whatever it is, we have many, many lives as men and women. And so to express that is completely natural. And I'm sure Jim could speak to this more, but many of the North American, Native American tribes had a special veneration, a special sacredness for people that they called two-natured
Hmm.
or two-spirited,
Two spirit.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, two-spirited. So
Mhm.
this is not something that's new, but I think it's new in the sense that it's happening more now.
Mhm.
And um, the dinosaur thinking, like Jim was saying, of the old breadwinner man who's emotionally unavailable and kind of a blunt object forcing his way through the world, is that's the old paradigm that will not stand.
Nope.
It's not adaptable. And I think there's a real crisis among, especially men of a certain age, I would say very roughly, probably over 40, where, they're looking back at their lives and saying, wow, I did everything I thought I was supposed to do.
Mhm.
And yet I'm really unhappy.
Mhm.
My health isn't great. My relationships suck. All the things that I thought I was supposed to have, I don't. So what did I do all that for?
Well, they have things, but they don't have any peace.
Right.
There's a couple really good key points here. First of all, with the men being the ones in control, all the prophecies, all the beliefs of most native tribes, not only in the US, but globally that I've worked with, we're heading into the fifth or the sixth Earth, depending on who you talk to. And it has gone back and forth. On one Earth, the men are in control. On the next, the women. On the next, the men. On the next, the women. None of them has worked. And the prophecy now is if we don't come together equally in harmony, we're going to be done. It'll be that last kick in the butt you're talking about. And so that's why it's really important. We strive for it. And part of it right now, you're right. The women have to come up because they've been down in this one. The men have to chill it a bit. So maybe that is starting to happen. I said the other one is the young people. And that is a critical piece. I've felt that for a long time, and I've taught at all levels. So I had some good experience there when I stepped up on this road, which does not have a destination, by the way. It is all journey. Um, and the elders, native elders, would ask me, Jim, the young people come and talk to you. We can't get anybody to come and hear our teachings anymore. What's wrong? And I would sit with them for a period of time. I went around and sat with various elders trying to see what was going on, and it was pretty obvious to me, not to them, because again, they were following the old culture. You come, you sit at their feet, they're going to tell you the teachings, they're going to teach you, and then you go and you practice. Young people won't take that anymore. They want a dialogue, not a lecture. And now I'm watching a lot of elders shift into that, and the young ones are coming back again. And it is part of that whole generational thing you're talking about. When I taught in the colleges and the universities, um, everything I did was a dialogue. Everything I did was to get those students out in the community, not just sitting in front of me. I'm one person, nothing special. I've learned a few things.
Mhm.
So I think both of those are critical to this because both the women and the young people are absolutely critical, or this won't work. We'll be over the cliff. Stick in the middle. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I'm just trying to think of how to respond to that because I'll just ask it. So, with that being said, what do you think is the best way that we can approach men in general, and but probably maybe even women too? Because, like you said, we got to bring the men down a little. We got to bring the women up. What's the best way to find this commonality? I mean, obviously, I don't think teaching everybody in the world shamanism is the answer, or teaching
No.
everybody a certain, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
what can we do, I guess, to help others move in the right direction?
You or me, Mark.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do have a piece on that. I think what it comes down to me is shifting into a more heart-centered existence. We're so dominated by the rational, and we've completely demonized the non-logical world, the imaginal world, with to the point where we almost deny the fact that any thought we've ever had, anything we've ever accomplished in our lives, even in a strict rationalist sense, began with our imagination. The only thing that's different with these indigenous cultures is they believe in the power of imagination. They believe that's actually directly linked to the power of creation, which I believe too. So what it comes down to is, do we want to create things from our heart and really engage that imagination that we all have? It's our divine nature, right? Or do we want to continue with the definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result with a completely rationalist approach to the world and look at the state of the world? And there are still these people that have, they're all us, they're all we, right? Not meaning to say other, but there are a lot of people that believe that science will save us. And they believe that they can use science to somehow alter our physical body without really allowing for the possibility of consciousness being non-local or the possibility of spirituality. And they're powerful people, and they're spending a lot of money on this notion, and they're doing a lot of propagandizing about it. And I kind of look at it as the last gasp of the old way of thinking. It's just it's the shiny new thing in a new box, but it's really the old thing, right? Say hello to the new boss, same as the old boss, right? But it's really that heart-centered existence that men and women can engage in. Men need to release the fear of being vulnerable and having feelings and expressing those feelings. And women need to make it safe for that to occur because they're more used to having feelings. And the other thing that women are really good at is collecting in groups, collecting in tribes and sharing. So they can teach that to the men, right? So there's a lot of sharing that needs to occur, but I think it all comes down to being heart-centered.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting. My nonprofit is Sanctuaries of the Earth Mother. It's been around a while. It came out of a vision I had 30 years ago on my first vision quest. Um, Last year, a friend of mine, Christopher, who's been on a couple of the calls, it's hard because he's in New Zealand, which means he has to be up in the middle of the night. Um, he'll be coming back soon. But we got together to go on the road to do some sharing, some teaching, some learning as two elder men. And so we had this beautiful plan all worked out. Then we go here, and then we see this one. And then 3 days into this, we said, okay, let's get coffee. And we sat down and we said, okay, so far, absolutely nothing has worked. What the hell are we supposed to do? And we both sat there and went into our hearts and realized that has to be the way right now. We have relied on our brains way too much. Our brain, the main function of our brain from the beginning is to protect us. It evolved because we were the weakest thing on the planet. And so we had to see danger fast. And so if a dinosaur was tracking us down or a saber-toothed tiger, the brain went, danger, danger, get the hell out of there. And it was meant to. It saved us. We were weak. We didn't really have tools yet. It has not evolved to the point where it can distinguish what is dangerous now and what is not. Even for men, women stepping up, that's a danger. Danger, don't go near those women. That has to shift. In the meantime, we have to start working from the heart. It's where the women start, in the heart. And remember, we all have a masculine and feminine part of it, each one of us. Each one of us. Men have to work harder to develop that feminine part. Women, some of them, have to work harder to develop the masculine part. I think by doing that, we can start to overcome some of this. And how do we do it? That's hard. A short story. I'm a storyteller, but this will be a short one. Some years ago, I was at a retreat here in Sedona. It was the 13 indigenous grandmothers. Probably people listening to this, you guys may have heard of them. They're a powerful group. They're global. It started with 13 indigenous grandmothers. many of whom have now passed on. Um, Very powerful women. Some are still here, and new ones have stepped up to fill those gaps. So this was a week-long conference, and I was asked to come. I don't remember by whom, but I was. And my wife at the time and a very close friend who was a woman were coming along as well. So as we met, once again, the audience was probably 70% women, 30% men. And halfway through the first day, there was a lot of anger coming out against men from some of these women. And yet the whole conference was to find ways for men and women to work together. And being one who never learned to shut up, I, I put my hand up and I said, "Grandmother, I really, could I speak?" It was going around. They were asking for questions. And it was Grandmother Agnes, who I found to be one of the most powerful women, not only in that group, but one that I've ever met. Um, Very strong, very in control, but very, very heart centered. And I shared, as a man sitting in here, a small part of the group, I'm feeling very uncomfortable. I understand the anger totally. But how can we find ways to work together if these things are still going back and forth in here? And they actually stopped things for a bit. And Agnes said, we're going to add 2 more days onto this conference. Jim, will you come? Some of you others, will you come? And let's talk about this. In the meantime, we have to find a way to move ahead with this conference in a good way. Um, and so I actually left for the rest of that day. I'd already decided to do that. I needed some separation. Um, it got better the next couple of days. So sometimes just sitting and speaking about it. So we have to get venues where we can comfortably come together. When we do ceremony, we do, especially when we do a sweat lodge, we do a worry basket outside. It can be a real one or it could be a hypothetical one. Before you come in, anything that's bothering you, you leave it there. Any politics, any religion, leave it there. You come in open hearted. And if we can do that, then you have good discussion. We're not going to cure everything. There's a lot of anger out there, there's rage out there. And yes, these things that are happening now, that is to bring it to the surface. Last gasp, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. It's bringing this nonsense to the surface where we can see it. Fascism? I mean, come on, Nazism? It's almost, if we wrote that, no one would believe it. And yet here it's coming again.
Oh,
It's because it still has to be healed. And that's our job, I think. I think that made sense. I hope so.
No, it did, and that's kind of what I was trying to describe earlier with, kind of calling out all men as toxic. And it's like, well, not all of us are this way, and we're here trying to help. And I don't want to take away from things that happen to any race, culture, sex, whatever. There's been atrocities across the board on everybody at some point in the world, and we can never forget that. And that's not what I'm trying to even remotely say. But for us to move forward, we need to somehow put aside some of these differences and be able to find a path to work forward. I mean, look at, I don't want to get into politics, but look at Israel and Gaza. That's been going back and forth for thousands of years because so and so did something to me once and so did something to me once. And it's nonstop. And we can't continue to live that way. And the heart center that you bring up is, I know for me, it's been something that's been hard. I've always been in my head. I also grew up in that generation of, my parents saying, keep crying and I'll give you something to cry about. I wasn't allowed to express. I wasn't allowed to give emotions. You had to suck it up and move on. In the military, suck it up, move on. There
mhm,
is no showing emotions. And that has been one of the hardest things as a father, because it's like
mhm,
I want to show my kids that there can be emotions that are okay. But at the same time, I also face those blocks of wanting to show those emotions
mhm,
because I don't wanna look weak, even in front of my own family, and I know that's not weakness, but that's how I've been raised for 44 years, is to show
mhm,
those emotions were weak, and yeah, it's and again, we're not going to solve this tonight. That's not the point of this. It's just to get the conversation going, but it's making those safe spaces for those conversations. Like, yes,
Mhm.
I'm going to listen to you, but I need you to listen to me as well without defense on both sides. I think that's the biggest one. It's like when you're married and the wife's saying you didn't do something, I'm automatically getting in the defensive mode. It's like, well, I'll get to it later. I've been busy doing X, Y, B, B, da, da, da. And all she's saying is, hey, we still need to do the dishes tonight before we go to bed. Obviously that's a very minor example from what we're talking about. And, but yeah, it's that heart space. I'm still working on that journey. I mean, I've been through lots of ayahuasca ceremonies, and that's the number one thing that's kept coming up for Mama I is you got to open up the heart space. You got to open up the heart space.
Mhm.
And I guess, I don't know how would be my next question for maybe if those who have or have done it better than me. I think I've gotten better at it, but what would be a good recommendation to start if you have one?
Isn't it interesting that I'm sure this is common. You mentioned core shamanism before. I'd be really interested to see how many different indigenous cultures see it the same way, but they're all very earth centered, earth connected, heart centered, and at least in the Indian cosmology, they see this triangle of victim, oppressor, savior that we bounce between this triangle, right? And simply recognizing that that exists and recognizing the Inca called this life the great game,
Mhm.
and not in a way to denigrate our experience or anybody's lived experience or oppression. What they were saying is you're to be the fullest expression of who you are as a human being, you need to learn how to play this game, right? I mean, that simply. And so that means abandoning all the things that are blocking you from recognizing the paradigm that's in front of you and fully experiencing it. And when you die, being fully awakened, meaning no regrets, no fears. You've left all of that behind. You've done your work. And I can tell you if that view of the world was ever presented to me at the right time as a young person, it would have completely changed my life. But we don't talk to our young people about the endless possibilities of their lives, their existence. We're all, well, I don't know who said it. Some famous person said it that we're all born poets and artists, and then, the world kind of beats it out of us. Well, I think we're coming to the end of that. And so now I think any of us that have stepped up and raised our hand for spirit to recognize us as someone who wants to do the work, it's really facing the shadows within us, doing that heart work that you're doing, that we're all doing, and having the courage to face those shadows and making it okay and safe for other people to do the same. To giving each other the space and the recognition that, hey, we're all on our own path. We all have our own stuff to work on and it's different, but it's a lot more the same than it's different. And that's really where I think that not only being heart centered, but loving without attachment, loving in an unconditional way, loving in a broad, you know, cosmic way, for lack of a better way to say it. Um, and not to bring up religion, but I think that's, what Jesus was trying to teach the people of his time. He was literally saying, do what I do.
Mm.
And instead of doing that, we built an entire religion around him and separated him from us and said, you can't go there because you're not the son of God. When I believe he was saying exactly the opposite, literally do what I do, which is love everyone unconditionally. So that's a tall order, I realize, for most people, but I think it starts with having the courage to face your own shadows and actually seeking things that trigger you, because that's your guide to tell you where your work is. If something triggers you, pisses you off, makes you uncomfortable, that's where your work is. So do it.
Yeah, good words, both of you. There's hmm, times that change your life. That's a good one, Mark. I'm just thinking when I was young, which I still can remember, um, Vietnam War was going on. My number, we had draft numbers then. They pulled numbers. I was to get married in a few weeks, and my number came out second. And I wasn't going to go fight in a war. I already was um, understanding that that was a war only for commodities, not for people. And so I wasn't sure how to deal with that. So I started fighting against the war. And as those who thought we were the enemy because we were protesting threw bricks at us, we picked them up and threw them back again. They hated us and we hated them. And guess what happened? It kept on going. Then, and I was a puppy. Um, I had marched with Dr. King as a kid, and I remembered his words, and I could see that that peaceful resistance was working. Hate, not working, peaceful existence working. So I went back into my Vietnam work and luckily got not luckily, I'm sure it happened because Creator wanted it to. I connected with the Berrigan brothers, who were Jesuit priests and huge anti-war protesters. And I worked at it that way. And that's continued a long time. We need to make those shifts now. We need to make them big time. And how do you deal with that heart problem? Jeremy, when I went through this years ago, and I was all head as well. I had all my own businesses. I was always up here. My businesses were really successful because I was a brilliant business person, not because Creator let them be successful so I could do what I needed to do. No, it was all about me. But I was all up here. I couldn't get in here. My father was my model, and my father went through some hellacious things in World War II, so he never reconnected to his heart. But then when teachers started to find me, the way shamanically to go with this from them, and I resisted shamanic training for years. I didn't wanna know the deep stuff, was not to try to work here, not even to try to work here. It was to work here. This is where there's no communication between the brain and the heart. That's what slows you up. When I started doing that and sharing what I had to say, it started to get better. Not perfect. It took a long time. I had to keep consciously going into my heart. I still have to at times. Whenever I do a ceremony, the first thing I tell everyone, okay, we're getting out of our head and into our heart. If you slide back up, that's all right, but be aware of it and then get back down in there again. So if you work on speaking your truth and truly opening up, I know I tried to do it in the beginning then too. I was in a sweat lodge, one of my first, and not knowing much. And God, I felt so emotional. And I really wanted to just cry. But I was still under my old training. Oh God, I can't do that. What a weakling I'll be, you know? It's like, oh, so I'm fighting it back. And the person leading the lodge, an elder out of Denver who was quite, I mean, he could sense things that just were amazing. He stopped the ceremony for a moment. Apparently I wasn't the only one. If I remember right, there was like 3 men in there like me who just wanted the tears to come out. Um, and what he said was simple, you know, some of you are holding back. Some of you men are holding back
Mhm.
because you think it's weak to cry. And truly, the strongest men are the ones who can cry.
Mhm.
Boom. And away we went. So if you let it start to happen, even let it take you over. I don't care if you have better talk to your wife first, but have a screaming Mimi and tears and whatever. let it open. Let it open. Let it start to flow.
Yeah.
And it'll balance because for too long, I'm sure, like I was, for too long you had penned it up because big strong guy, you're military too, ex-military too. So there's another whole level of, be that strong guy, carry that gun, kill the baddies.
Yeah. Fortunately, I didn't have to shoot anybody, so
That's good. But metaphorically,
yeah,
we are.
yeah, it was a
Isn't it
joke.
interesting that the Andean Pacos, one of their central teaching premises is that your wounds are your power.
Right.
Your wounds are what connects us to each other.
Yep.
So they're not to be hidden. They're not to be denigrated. They're to be honored and explored and deepened in terms of our understanding of them.
Mhm.
So that was a really powerful teaching that I took on early on. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things that kind of cracked me open was understanding that that's where the power is actually going into your wounds.
Yep. That's so true. Um, the expression one of the expressions for that is "let your wounds bleed,"
Mhm.
and that comes up in ceremony. Let your wounds bleed. In other words, let it out. What is it? Put it out there. Let us all hear. For some of these ceremonies, it's like Las Vegas. Whatever happens in the ceremony stays in the ceremony. So
Yeah, sure.
be comfortable.
Yeah, and that goes back again to that premise of having that space to do it. There's that meme that you see all the time of, you know, who do you go and talk to when life is hard and you need to get some stuff out? And then the guy's like, nobody cares. I'm
Mm,
not going to tell anybody. Why should I? And then
yeah.
it just continues. And then that's what we need. We need that eventually, the community and I think both sides, but I think men at least need to be vulnerable with other men to start.
Mhm.
Then they can start feeling more comfortable with it, I guess.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's gonna be different for each person, but
Mhm.
I think a lot of men, if they can get vulnerable with each other first, then they can start being more vulnerable with the ladies. But then the women also need to realize that they're still men because you also see the other side of, "Oh, well, he's
Mhm.
crying. He's not a real man. I don't want that."
Mhm.
You know? Even if he meets checks all the boxes, 6 foot whatever, can bench press 500 pounds, making $1,000,000, drives the car, but he cried at a movie,
Uh,
so now he's not a real man.
uh-huh.
Well, you said a word there that's key, Jeremy, and that's community.
Yep.
Mm,
And I lived most of my life avoiding being in community. I was very introverted. And then when I had my car accident, I was even more isolated. Because when you're in pain, you want to pull yourself into your turtle shell and isolate yourself, right? But what I've learned as part of this healing process, true healing, is done in community.
yeah.
So it's almost like our baser instincts that are telling us to isolate ourselves. It's exactly the opposite of what we need to be doing to heal.
Mm,
We should be going out into community, finding communities
mhm.
that we could be part of, that we can be vulnerable in. And whatever that looks like for you, whether it's other men, women, mixed communities, whatever you identify with, the point is be in community.
Yeah. And it's something we've lost definitely over past 100 years. I mean, we no longer have multi-generational families. Our elders get older, we don't talk to them anymore, we just kinda push them aside, put them in a facility to be taken care of.
Mm,
A lot of parents aren't around because they're working 2, 3 jobs just to try
mhm.
to make it. Kids are home alone. The only thing they have is their own community on,
Mhm.
social media or video game chat
Yep.
rooms. They're not actually spending time physically with each other. I see that with my own kids. It's like, "No, why don't you call him up and see if he wants to come and hang out? Like, play
Mm,
with him. Spend time with each other. You don't need to just be on the Xbox." That's that's one thing
yeah.
I've noticed too.
Yeah, I
It
think social media is it's the newest oxymoron, right? There's nothing social about the media. It's more isolating
oh,
than anything else. But It's all about the intention with which you use it. I mean, we're using it right now
Yep.
to build a community, but what it can also turn into without that intention is an echo chamber
Hmm.
where you isolate yourself by spewing the same hatred that you're reading, and AI just gives you more of what you asked for, the algorithms. So yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. It's a double-edged sword. It's not necessarily negative or positive. It's how you
Mhm,
use it. And I've watched kids being consumed by it. I've had parents call me in and ask me to work with their kids being consumed by it. On the other hand, before it happened, if I wanted to learn from a shaman, I had to go live in the jungle for 6 months,
Mhm.
mhm,
and I could only do so many of those. Now, look at us. We can
mhm.
share this around the globe, and we're not together physically. So it does have its values. You know, we put together a conference call with 50 people and we circle the globe. Look at what we can accomplish in a period of time. But then if we jump on and start using it negatively, it becomes negative. So
Mhm,
it's up to us again. How are we going to use these tools?
mhm.
You know, in a good way or a dark way?
But I guess with that, so one idea I've been kind of floating, and I think I heard it from somebody else, and it just kind of stuck with me. So, in the shamanic mindset, we have the plant people, the stone people, the animals, and they're all
Mhm.
our teachers. And it's said that the stone people are the oldest of our teachers because they've been around the longest. Now, when we look at technology and how it's made from minerals and different things like that, which is, you could say, part of the stone people. So, could that be their way of trying to show us how crazy things have gotten by allowing us to even have this kind of technology? I mean, maybe that's too metaphysical, but those are the kind of things I think about at night.
Well, we're both in tech, so
Yeah.
I don't think it's all that crazy. And a few years ago, probably 5 years ago, when AI was starting to become a little more prevalent, now it's just exploded into something a whole different thing. But back then, I said, okay, I'm not going to fear this. I'm going to dive into it head first and really understand it. And so now it's an area of specialty for me that I end up talking to people about what's really happening, what is it really capable of, that kind of thing. And having the shamanic perspective, or bringing that on board in my life, so to speak, has given me a completely different view of AI, which is really representative of kind of where we're at right now, technology, right? And and that is the importance of what you consume, right? I mean, one of the program that I do in my medicine that I'm bringing right now is about optimizing the mind body spirit connection, starting with the body. And AI is not bad. It's not good. It can be an echo chamber for um, the baser instincts, or it can be a creative and thoughtful companion, depending on what energy you put into it. So I think we're at a turning point right now because it's making a lot of things that used to require a lot of toil and mundane tasks really, really easy. And so that's going to cause some societal shifting around lower paid jobs and lower wage jobs, low creativity jobs. Yes, AI will displace those jobs, but also release us to do more creative things if we look at it right. So it's all about taking on the mindset of expansion or taking on the mindset of suffering. And AI is just kind of in the background. It's something that we created, and we can either suffer from it or we can benefit from it, just like anything else, right? So in terms of the link to the stone people, maybe. I don't have a strong opinion on that one way or another, but what I do know is that everything that's happening right now is happening for us, not to us. And so we can choose to be empowered and excited by this turbulent time that we're in, or we can choose to hide under a bed and suffer. And really, our perception forms our reality.
Yeah, I don't have a I'm still working through this AI thing. Um, and so far I'm finding it more dark than light, but it doesn't mean it won't shift. I think a lot of this began and I'm saying that primarily because those controlling it are going to try to use it to control us once again. Where this whole thing really went wrong in my mind was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Humans were pulled into cities.
Mm.
We were promised the bright lights, that come to Oz, make lots of money. Oh, things are wonderful, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's also a very ideal way to control people. Put them all into a tight space, put them up against each other. Oh, look, those immigrants are from XYZ. They look different. How about those over there? They look different. And so they could keep that going, and it's still happening.
Mhm.
We have to take over again. We have to take control back as true thinking, feeling beings in the light. And there's a lot more of us than there ever was. When I was young, and if I would talk this way, oh boy, wouldn't be anyone there to back you up, except some older people would say, shut up, sit down, and mind your own business. So that doesn't happen anymore, as much anyway. So I think it's a matter of shifting that whole model. All of those who are in power still think it's an I am society. I can control this. I can do that. It's not. We have to be a we once again. That is indigenous cultures are, in my mind, so important right now. Not that they're all knowing. No. Indigenous people I know are like anyone else, good, bad, and ugly. But they've lived close to the earth. They're much more connected to that we mentality. They're much more connected to the balance with the earth. So what they share can help bring us all back into that realm. And so we need to listen. And we need to listen. I think it was you said, Mark. No, I guess it was you, Jeremy. Listen to their elders. Listen to all the elders. They've learned something. I know when I was younger, I never really listened. Okay, grandmom's going off again. I'll listen a little bit just to be nice, but I didn't pay attention. And that has to shift. And especially for the young. If the young want to be heard, then they also have to listen. All these things have to be community again, community sitting in circle, respecting everyone's opinion. We don't have to agree. That's not the point at all. If we all agreed, we'd have a problem too, because nothing would happen. But we have to show respect. We have to listen. And most importantly, we have to listen to the earth. Not only listen, but do what she says. I've listened to the earth my entire life. It's only recently I realized, oh, hell, I have to actually do what she's saying now, too. Don't build, don't build my house on that place. Don't, So, and that might be the rock people talking. I don't know. They move too. Want to see a rock move? Sit there for 10,000 years and you'll see that rock move an inch if you really want to do that.
Yeah.
The Tree Nation, the standing people were some of my best teachers up in the redwoods. I try to get there every year and I just sit there with them and I hear them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what's real and what we feel inside, it doesn't matter. Really doesn't. If I was Aborigine, I would believe that true creation, true reality was in dream time. They believe you create everything and do anything in your dreams, then we wake up and just enact what we've already created. That's fine, it's hard to understand sometimes, but, so what's real and what's not real? I don't know. I think it's all real, it's just how we're using it, how we're looking at it.
Mm. Jeremy, if I can bring in a piece that Jim just prompted for me, that I think there's an inherent paradox in thinking about self-empowerment in the context of the we, of the community, right? And if you look at the central mantra or central living principle of the Karo people, which is Ayni, AYNI, that's about harmony and reciprocity, the saying that goes along with it is for me today, for you tomorrow, or maybe it's the other way for you today, for me tomorrow. That's probably better. It's the same as the African Ubuntu. I am because we are. And what people don't realize because of the way that we've been living for the last few hundred years in the West is that there's a self empowerment and a reclaiming of our own personal sovereignty when we live for the group because of that reciprocity and because of the harmony that comes from it. There's no other way that humans can live where there's that energy exchange constantly happening, except living for the group. That's why the Karo shamans talk about dreaming the world into being. And they say dreaming the world first, then dreaming your community, then dreaming yourself. And I'm still struggling with that one a little bit because my brain is not wired that way. But I'm taking it on as much as I can and as fast as I can and as deep as I can because I get it in concept, right? But living that way, it's like what if the world was in harmony like that? Then what would your community look like? What would your family look like? What would your relationships look like? And then finally, if all that was true, what would you look like? What would you feel like if all that was in place? Okay, now bring that into your heart and really dream that. Invest that with your energy, invest that vision with your energy, right? We're just not taught to think that way or feel that way, right? And I think that's the game changer is once we can start to make that shift, each of us individually living for the group, as ironic as I just said that, that's when the energy starts to shift, like dropping a pebble in the pond and watching the waves go out, right? Each one of us sends those waves out and crashing into the next person, and then they do the same thing, right?
I would agree with that, and that goes with that same principle of, work on yourself first because what you do affects 7 generations behind you, 7 generations ahead of you. It's the same thing when I'm talking with clients or whoever. It's don't worry about your dad, don't worry about your mom, worry about you. And then once you start working on yourself and becoming who you wanna be, the better version, quote unquote, they'll start to see that change. They'll start to shift with you at some point. And it's going to be a slow process. It's not going to be overnight. And even, even I sometimes will fall back into those old routines and habits that I'm trying to shift out of because, I haven't been on a 40-year-old journey to do this. I'm just really getting started. But I would think even on a 40-year journey, sometimes you're going to get those trigger points and take a step back. And then you got to understand that's what's going on and then take those steps forward. And then as far as what you were saying, Jim, with getting back into the earth and everything, I have seen that shift. And a lot of that was when COVID happened. I mean, I don't, it was being stuck in the cities for some people and lockdowns and being confined in their little apartment cages and realizing that there's got to be a better way. And a lot of people I know have fled the cities. They're buying land now. They're trying to raise their own animals, their own fruits and vegetables. They're trying to get back into the earth. And and some people say that's part of that spiritual awakening that's happening right now, which I kind of think it is. It's a lot of the people I've interviewed so far, it's right around 2020. That's when the shift started happening for them. Mine was a little bit earlier than that, but not much. In 2019, I had a small house, about 2 acres. I was just starting to raise chickens and everything, and that summer, I was like I see it now as a calling or spirit telling me, "You gotta do this," but at the time, I didn't know what it was. Told my wife, I was like, "We gotta move. We need to move. We need to move somewhere with some more space. We need to do it now, or we are not going to have a chance to do it." She's like, "What are you talking about? We just moved, like, 3 years ago." I was like, "We need to move." I don't know what the hell it is, but it was just in me that we had to move. And I didn't move far. I moved 10 minutes down the road, but now I have like 8 acres and there's like 50 acres of untouched forest in front of me. I have all this space. And then COVID happened. I'm like, oh, that's what that was. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the same with me getting into shamanism was
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for it. And then
No.
Facebook ads started showing up with teachers, and then books started showing up on my Amazon and
Mhm.
recommended reading. And then I found a teacher and then found a different teacher and another teacher.
Mhm.
Like,
And your poor wife is probably thinking, "Oh, why did I have to get stuck with this crazy man?"
she's okay with it now, but it took a
Oh,
minute.
good. It took a bit, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and you're right, and, it doesn't matter if we've been on the road 40 years or 4 years, everybody's needed right now. And I've been connected to the earth this whole walk, and so I've seen tons of changes. When I was young, we could go out there, we could drink water out of the streams, we could
Mm,
catch a fish and eat it, not have to worry about anything. Butterflies were everywhere. We don't see that now, but we can recreate that. We can reweave it differently. There's nothing to stop us. The ability's there. The creatures are still there. It's yeah, and COVID, that was one of the it's hard to say positive outcomes from something like that, but it was a positive outcome.
Mhm.
And the predictions are, again, the prophecies that more things are gonna come like COVID, even
mm,
stronger because we're still not listening enough. And not that we're all gonna hear it, of course. That we know there's only a finite number of us who will get the calling and stand up, and that's okay. That's been predicted too. Um, but the more we can connect in with the earth, the more we become whole. We're doing that here now near Sedona. We've got 6 properties that have come together to see how we can collectively work, each with a little different function, and we've got a 315-acre piece that we're going after.
mm,
And others are showing up one from Crestone in Colorado, one from California. So this network is starting to form, and it's not something we did consciously. Once again, we stayed open. Okay, Creator, Mother Earth, ancestors, whomever, we're open, we're ready, we're your tools. Show us what to do. And I think we're doing a good job listening. And to do that, you have to be, one of you hinted at it before, a hollow bone.
mm,
You can't let anything interfere in there. Shamanism, especially, if you're going to be serious about doing any kind of practice, you got to be that hollow bone and you got to accept that we're just tools. We can't
mhm.
heal anybody, but we can be great tools to let Creator heal people. And
Right.
if that's what it is, great. So yeah, I think the earth is, for me, she's the primary teacher and the primary healer. Everyone I work with, I send them out into nature,
Yep.
every single one, because there's that power and that strength and that energy you can't get anywhere else.
It's funny. I give that homework to my clients a lot as a follow up to
Mhm.
whatever work we do together is
Mm.
go outside, put your bare feet on the bare earth, and let the sun shine on your face. And I usually hear from them, "Oh, yeah, I haven't done that in a while." Because you just don't think of doing that as a practice. Working in an office park somewhere downtown, I bet you can find a patch of grass somewhere. Just go take your shoes off and stand there.
Again, that goes back to where they live too. I mean, like, I'm here in Washington State, you're in Oregon, you're in Arizona. I feel we have a little bit more nature around us than if we were living in
Oh,
Seattle, for example. There's a few parks, but
yeah.
it's just concrete.
There's a tree on the street outside of you. That's nature.
Yep.
That's right.
There's a caterpillar crawling up your screen. That's nature. Yeah, is it harder to find? Is it less expansive? Absolutely. But it's there.
Yep.
And, you have to take what you can get. Those people, I try to tell them too. That's good. I get it. That's where you are. That's where you want to stay. So when you have a day off, get the hell out of your city. Drive, drive just for a little bit, get into that nature and then stop. And like Mark's, take your shoes off. Absolutely. Absolutely. And walking to and from your car to get to your next appointment, that's not nature. I'm sorry. I have people actually say that. Oh, I go outside. Yeah.
Yeah. Go to my car, then I go to another building.
Yeah, right.
Um, just checking the time. Do you guys have any other thoughts or questions you want to bring up? I want to make sure this is open, not just me asking all the questions too. I don't know if you guys have any points you want to touch on.
I think
I
you've done
feel
a good job of moving it around the circle. I think we've all put things out there.
Good.
yeah, feel
Cool.
complete with that.
Good. So I do want to, like I said, host this again.
Mhm.
Maybe find a, right now we were just kind of going into an overall broad topic. Maybe next time we'll get something a little bit more
Mhm.
pinpointed. Maybe I'm not sure exactly what that looks like yet, but want to definitely try to have this more on the regular, like maybe once a month or something, just get a good discussion going.
Mhm.
Maybe bring in other guests. Maybe they have other topics we can learn from. Maybe
Mhm.
bring in one of those grandmothers we can learn from them as well, Jim, or someone from the other side,
Sure.
quote unquote.
That would
bring
be
somebody,
amazing.
bring them women in into the circle
Mhm.
and see what we can learn. Find some common ground on some things, and hopefully move forward with it.
Mhm.
With that, I guess, does anyone have any parting words or anything you want to share or something you're working on? Jim, you mentioned a nonprofit. I'll put everything in the show notes too, and I'm going to give you guys the
Okay,
video and all that too, but
good.
that way people can go to it.
I think we hit a lot of really good topics tonight from 3 different perspectives. So I'm definitely gonna put this recording up and share it out amongst my groups. I think it's valuable, very valuable. I did a recording today and ended up longer than I anticipated around this sweat lodge that happened the other night because it was so unique, and they kinda dovetail. I mean,
Mm,
that was about women taking back the power, and,
Mm.
one gray-haired guy was sitting there wondering, "How the hell did this happen?" So, yeah, no, I'll put it out there, and
okay.
I think doing these periodically is a great idea. Who you want to have on, it's you don't have to think about it, it'll come to you.
Yeah. Sweet.
And for me, I mentioned before, I'm deepening or broadening my practice, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. I'm actually allowing new things in. It's not me doing something; I'm allowing something.
Mhm,
But I'm finding, at least where I'm at right now, is my medicine is this mind, body, spirit healing thing, starting with the body
mm,
and teaching people what I learned to bring myself back from the brink of death, not exaggerating, and really leading a regenerative lifestyle
mm,
like the Caro do in the Andes and have been doing for hundreds of years. And of all the things that I tried my whole life, this way of living and eating was an epiphany, a game changer for me. And it was less like I was learning it than more like I was remembering it, to the point where now I've been doing it for about a year and a half. It feels like I've always done it. This is the way I eat. This is the what I eat, how I think about it, all that stuff. So I'm really feeling honored and blessed to be doing a program like that now. I think we're in our third week, and I'm learning a lot from the high level of engagement of the students, the clients that are doing it with me. And I know it's just going to get richer and better. And I'm setting it up as I started out doing it as kind of like start on this day, end on this day, 12 weeks. But I'm learning to set it up as more of a perpetual thing where people can come into it anytime and, you know, come out of it 12 weeks later. So um, it's, yeah, it's really exciting. So if anybody's interested in doing that, they can reach
Okay. Yeah, and I'll definitely I'll link your Facebook profiles and your website. I'll also link the interview that we did together where you go more detailed into your story. That way people can get the context to what you're saying.
out. Mhm.
Make sure all that's in there. And then Jim, send me the link for your nonprofit too when you get a chance, and then
okay,
I'll make sure that's
sure.
in there as well. And then I guess for me,
Sorry.
I guess the main thing I have going on besides this podcast is I'm actually going to get ready to start my own program, but I'm more focused on working with people with PTSD and trauma because that's what I went through. And so this type of work really worked for me, and so I am building that community. I'm doing the community thing, but I'm making it a group healing process with community because that is important, working through that trauma. So that program for me will actually be starting in March. So it's not up yet, but I'll put the links if anyone's interested in that as well. But that's going to be a group program online. But it is important to get that community aspect and just go over the tips and tricks that I used.
So needed. I'm glad you're doing it.
Oh yeah, and it won't just be me too. I'm actually joining forces with some other people. I got a guy who does mindfulness meditations and breath work. He'll be doing a whole module. And then I have another lady doing some somatic body work. So I'm trying to hit the body, the breath, and the spirit all at once. Connect
Mhm.
people with their spirit guides, release the trauma multiple ways, and then just let it go. And then hopefully they'll be in a better place at the end of it. It's a journey. I still have my moments, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it was.
Your wounds are your power, man.
Yeah.
We all have our moments.
Oh, yeah. It's the important thing is to understand them and forgive them, and then forgive yourself for
Mhm.
having them and move forward.
Mhm.
Cool. No, this is great, guys. I really appreciate this. And yeah, I would definitely want to do this again. And
Mm.
once this is over, I'll upload everything. But yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Shaman Stories podcast. If you have any interest in the services that I provide or the services of my guest, please click the link in the show notes below. Thank you. And until next time, have a good journey.